Yeah, Jason Wygant here, RacerX Podcast Network. Going to give you 3 special episodes of podcast to help get through this coronavirus lockdown quarantine situation. Hope everybody is hanging in there and staying safe. Recently, we've added a new feature to the RacerX Illustrated magazine, which are audio reads. We're doing audio reads now from the author of the stories in the magazine. So if you don't have time to read and it's more convenient to listen, you can listen as you would, say, an audiobook. Now, normally you have to be a subscriber to access this. You can go to racerxonline.com/audio. But we're going to roll out 3 recent features from the magazine for free right here on our podcast network. And our first is going to be Davey Coombs reading his feature from the April issue, Day 1 at Daytona. This is the guide to the very first Daytona Supercross, which happened 50 years ago. So long ago that the term Supercross didn't exist. It was a completely different time for the sport. So I'll send it to Davey's read of the story that he wrote here in a moment, but we will tell you how you can subscribe so you can continue to listen to this audio. It's 99 cents. That's our promotion. 99 cents for 3 months to be able to read the entire magazine in digital form. So go to RacerXOnline/subscribe for that, or pay $2.99 for 3 months of both digital and print edition. That is an unbelievable deal, and it will also give you access to the audio reads. We pick features from the magazine, we turn them into audio, and you'll be able to listen to those for the next 3 issues as well. So let's get to Day 1 at Daytona, read by Davey Coombs. And don't forget, go to racerxonline.com/subscribe and racerxonline.com/audio to be able to sign up and to listen. Take it away, Davey.
Welcome to a RacerX Read Aloud. This is from the April 2020 issue of the magazine, and it's called Day 1 at Daytona. The 2020 Daytona Supercross will mark the 50th running of the oldest race in Monster Energy AMA Supercross. This is how the first one went, way back in 1971. Motocross in America was still in its infancy back in 1971. There was no AMA Pro Motocross Championship, let alone a Supercross series, but the dirt bike boom was picking up steam. The Japanese manufacturers were all working on new bikes to challenge the dominant European brands, and the seminal film On Any Sunday was close to release. Dirt Bike, the first U.S. magazine, quote, devoted completely to the off-road rider, unquote, would launch in April. And Edison Dye's Inter-Am Tour, which brought professional motocross to America in 1967, had become such a success that the American Motorcyclists Association, established in 1924, the year of the very first motocross race was held in Great Britain, finally decided to start sanctioning motocross events. The country's biggest motorcycle race at the time was the Daytona 200, which was celebrating its 30th anniversary in 1971. First held on the sand of Daytona Beach, the 200 was the grand finale of Bike Week, an annual festival of riding and racing. In 1961, the beach race was moved to Bill France's new Daytona International Speedway and became a road race that attracted the best riders in the world. The first winner of the 200 was Ed Kretz on an Indian. The 1970 winner was Dick Mann on a Honda, the first Daytona 200 win for any Japanese bike. The first Florida Winter-Am Motocross Series was held in 1969. Organized by a man named Russ Coe and a part-time racer named Bill West, it ran in January and February and was successful enough that it was held again in 1970, also with positive results. As planning began for 71, they looked for some kind of hook to put their series on the national map. What they came up with, according to West in an interview we conducted with him some years ago, was the idea of putting a motocross race on the infield of Daytona International Speedway during Bike Week. Many doubted that Bill France would allow such a race to happen, as motocross was thought to be an imperfect fit with the more prestigious road racing. However, West knew a man at the Speedway named Joe Widlock, who worked in Daytona's PR department, and invited him to visit an Inter-Am race in Georgia. According to West, Widlock was impressed enough that he went back to the Speedway and told them, quote, "We've got to have this," unquote. But it wasn't the boss he told. It was the boss's wife, Annie France, who held a lot of sway at Daytona. Recalled West, quote, Whitlock went to her and said, "Annie, we've got to do this motocross race. We can build a track over there on the infield, and if it loses money, you can go ahead and take it out of my pay." Unquote. Mrs. France then convinced her husband that an infield motocross race would be a great addition to Bike Week 1971. Needless to say, many on the road racing side of things did not agree. The first problem was what to call the race. The first modern Supercross would not be held until July of '72, and the word itself wouldn't be coined for a few more years. Heck, some were still calling motocross by its original British name, Scrambles. The weekly West Coast newspaper Cycle News referred to Daytona's new event as a road race cross, since it lacked the hills and natural terrain obstacles normally associated with motocross. Daytona's souvenir program described the yet-to-be-built track as, quote, a twisting dirt motocross course with bumps and dips, unquote. Yes, they used a hyphen in motocross back then. No matter the name, the Daytona race would mark the last round of the, quote, first annual, unquote, Florida Winter AMA Series, rechristened due to its new AMA sanction. The other races would be held at traditional MX tracks around the state, none of which still exist today. 2 weeks before the scheduled March 13th Daytona race, the series was holding its penultimate round. The 500cc winner was Husqvarna rider Brian Kenny from Cleveland. Barry Higgins, a New Yorker transplanted to Georgia, had won almost every 250 class moto of the series aboard his Spanish-made Osa. But he found himself with a new challenge in Husqvarna factory rider Gunnar Lindstrom, who had just arrived from Sweden. A third rider in the 250 class mix had been multitasking as a racer, motocrosser, school teacher, and track builder. Gary Bailey had become something of an ambassador for this new sport, and he was tasked with laying out the temporary motocross course. It wouldn't be in the current location in the middle of the Speedway's tri-oval, but rather in the infield section of Daytona's 3.81-mile road race course. Bailey sketched out a 9/10-mile track that would include several artificial jumps made of clay, which would be trucked in. In order to get around the permanent guardrails of the road course, he would pile sand over them for a couple more jumps. Right in the middle of it all was a big drainage ditch that couldn't be blocked or buried, so Bailey decided to build a couple of steep ramps buttressed with telephone poles and 2x4s so the riders could leap across the ditches. These gator pits did not go over well. Quote, "I remember those ditches very well," unquote, recalls the newly arrived Gunnar Lindstrom. Quote, "The jumps themselves were built up of white sand or clay, and there was no landing ramp on the other side, just straight down. We had not at the time figured out how to pre-jump them and get the bike over without hitting the other side hard, and scrubbing had not been invented yet either, so it was landing on flat ground on the back wheel, trying to get the front wheel down gracefully." Unquote. Quote, and this is Bill West, "We must have hauled 15 guys to the hospital that day. On the bikes we had back then, you just couldn't do stuff like that." Unquote. After some pressure from the AMA, Bailey added a slower, optional detour around the drop-offs, which were soon dubbed wussy paths. Bike Week began on Monday, March 8th, began the report in the May 1971 issue of American Motorcyclist. It continued. Throughout the weekend, vans carrying anxious riders, sparkling racers, and boxes of spare parts began arriving in Daytona. Many rolled their vehicles into nearby campsites, while others, who had made reservations, moved into local motels and hotels. Touring machines, sporting license plates from across the country and laden with gear for the week's stay, began to arrive. Groups of riders began to congregate and speculate about the race or reminisce past races. Already, excitement was growing. Back to our story. On the first night, the AMA held an awards ceremony where the 1970 AMA national champions were presented with jackets bearing their names and numbers. Since there was no AMA Pro Motocross Championship at the time, the jacket for MX went to Dick Burleson, then a Husqvarna Enduro rider. But the previous fall, the future King Richard Burleson raced in the Trans-AMA Series and was the top finishing American, scoring 4th overall against the Europeans. Burleson accomplished this while while simultaneously working on an engineering degree at the University of Michigan. At the same ceremony, Freddie Ephraim was named AMA Referee of the Year. In his real job, he was in charge of the Jacksonville Police Department's motorcycle pool, but on weekends he wore a striped shirt at the races. Freddie was well known and beloved in Florida racing circles, especially motocross, for which he was an early advocate. As Bike Week picked up speed, Daytona International Speedway was clicking off road racing events, and nearby Memorial Stadium was getting busy with flat track racing. Evel Knievel himself came to town, though he didn't do any actual jumps, just some promotional work for Harley-Davidson. And Pennsylvania's Ron Bond would add to a great bike week for Husqvarna by winning the Alligator Enduro, which started near the Speedway and went southwest toward what was then mostly undeveloped swampland. Some 500 other riders joined Bond in the race, including Jim France, Bill's son. Jim is now the CEO of NASCAR, as well as the owner of AMA Pro Racing. The motocross track was still being laid out on Friday, the day before the race, despite the fact that two road racing events were happening, the 76-mile novice event and the 100-mile junior race. Later that evening, when the road racing stopped and the rest of the Bike Week crowd turned its attention to the flat track races at Memorial Stadium, the infield crew used a tractor to push sand up and over the guardrails that lined the pavement. American motorcyclists said the finished track, quote, consisted of several artificial but exciting jumps and many banked and unbanked corners, unquote. And this is Gunnar Lindstrom. Quote, we were let in on Saturday morning and parked on the grass next to the MX track while the pavement boys were in the shade in the garages. Some of them may have come to watch, but I do not recall, unquote. It was an imperfect fit, the hippie-ish young motocrossers and the more clean-cut road racers and older flat-track racers. Bill West recalls the AMA official at the motocross riders meeting announcing, quote, I don't want to see any hair hanging out of the back of anyone's helmet, unquote. That same referee, then AMA Director of Professional Competition Tom Clark, further endeared himself to the MXers when he relieved Ephraim of his duties as race referee, then cut the scheduled hour-long practice in half, telling them, quote, we've got to get this thing over with. We've got a road race to run, unquote. The biggest problem was the fact that too many motocrossers showed up to be part of this new race. This despite the Lake Elsinore Grand Prix taking place the same weekend in California, meaning a lot of top West Coast talent, John DeSoto, Gary Jones, Mark Blackwell, Briar Holcomb, did not come. Still, the 500 class would have 40 riders on the starting line for 3 planned 20-minute motos, later cut down to 2 by Tom Clark in order to save time. The 250 class had even more riders, so the format was changed to have 2 10-minute qualifying heats that counted as the first moto, then a second 20-minute moto for the top 40 riders. Barry Higgins topped Lindstrom in the first 250 heat, and then the track builder Bailey, having just been lured away from the Greaves brand by Bultaco, topped the second moto with what Cycle News described as his, quote, razzle-dazzle showboat riding, unquote, which meant long wheelies on the straightaways and cross-ups off the bigger jumps. Quote, the careening riders showered the nearly 10,000 eager fans with a heavy cloud of black dust, unquote, was the Cycle News report. It went on, the Saturday infield Moto X packed in spectators 5 deep, even though many people didn't know one rider from another due to PA problems. This first-time show did not lack in pure excitement. The racers, who fell one after another in the trench over the center jump, were probably excited too, as they wondered if they were going to get out alive, unquote. Fortunately, everyone did get out of the first Daytona motocross race alive. Lindstrom would emerge as the winner of the 40-man 250 finale, and Kinney would outlast young Jimmy Weinert and first moto winner Bob Grossi to take the 500 class overall. As far as the Florida Winter AMA Series went, Kenny was also the 500 champion there, while Higgins and his Osa claimed the 250 title. As soon as the motocross races ended, the track crew rushed out to get the sand and dirt off the pavement. And later that afternoon, the 100-mile lightweight road race went off on a clean track, The overall winner was Kel Carruthers, an Australian rider on a Don Vesco Yamaha. He even set a new track record for this class, averaging over 101 miles per hour. By pretty much all accounts, the first Daytona motocross was a success. Most seemed to enjoy it, despite it being hurried along. According to Bill West, at least one of the established racing set saw the potential. Quote, Gary Nixon's mechanic, Ed Holcomb, was standing there next to me, unquote, West recalls. He took one look at the track, looked around at all the young guys who signed up to the race, and then turned to me and said, this motocross thing is going to destroy short track racing. This will be the bright and shiny new form of motorcycle racing. He wasn't far off, was he? Said West. On Sunday night, Lindstrom and Kinney were invited to the 1971 Winners' Banquet at Peabody Auditorium, along with all of the road racers, flat trackers, and enduro riders. When it was his turn to speak, Lindstrom boldly predicted that someday the Daytona motocross would be bigger than the 200, which brought laughter and derision from some in the audience. Quote, everyone thought I was just one of those arrogant Swedish riders, Lindstrom told Cycle News years later. He went on, they thought that my prediction was incredibly funny, but stupid. You look back now, and it doesn't look like it was too bad. End quote. Gunnar Lindstrom was right. 50 years later, the Daytona Supercross is the centerpiece of what is now the Monster Energy AMA Supercross Championship, the biggest motorcycle racing series in this country and second only to MotoGP on the world stage. Not bad for an event that started out as a road race cross.
And that is Day 1 at Daytona, written and narrated by Davey Coombs. Exclusive stories that you can only read or hear through RacerX Illustrated, the magazine. You can go to racerxonline.com/audio. That's where we're going to put all of the RacerX read-alouds. And again, we'll have 3 stories that you can listen to for free, though, right here on our podcast network. That's this episode, Day 1 at Daytona. We'll also have Davey reading his story about lockdown week, when the sport essentially shut down after Daytona this year due to the coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown. And we'll also have something completely different and narrated with the beautiful English accent, Rob Andrews narrating his story about the Cathedral of Motocross, the legendary Citadel at Namur racetrack in Europe. So we'll give you a little sample here with 3 of these stories. Make sure you subscribe. Go to racerxonline.com/subscribe. 99 cents for 3 digital issues. You can read them on your phone. You can read it via the web. And you get access to these audio read-alouds, or $2.99 to get both the print and digital edition for 3 months as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with more here in the RacerX Podcast Network.